Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I don't know why that didn't work. And I'm a little annoyed, but that's the way life goes. So just a couple things real quick. I'm going to erase that last thing because that didn't work at all. So let me make the quick announcements. So it's up through the end of page 6 through the election of 1896. That is the part that you need to have done for your review packet. That is the one I'll grade the most. I'm going to take some off of the next part because that will be fresher in your memory. Next, I am going to sign up to 1198 in the textbook, and there will be a quiz on Friday. And please check my webpage, especially the assignment section where I'm going to have information on there. I'm giving you an opportunity for extra credit. If you have an assignment that I have not put in the grade book or the program didn't put in the grade book, especially if it's over a week old, I'm not going back and checking those, so you're responsible. I'll go back and put down other grades, but you're the one responsible for getting that material in. Okay, so here is a pro-German propaganda poster. And you can see right there that this is the way Germany looked after the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, Hitler had taken power effectively. Remember the laws they took power with, like the Annalen Act that took away rights for Jews. But the big thing was that this was a fight against communists. And after the Reichstag burned down and they found a babbling communist, Dutch communist, Maris van der Lubbe, in one of the sub-basements of the Reichstag, they blamed it all on a communist plot, and this allowed Hitler to create a state of emergency under the Weimar Republic. Their constitution said he could do that, and Hindenburg, the president, who was more scared of communists than Hitler, allowed this to happen. You see this time after time where moderates will make a deal with the devil, or so-called moderates, more worried about their paycheck than the future of the country, will make a deal with the devil like they did in Nazi Germany to keep the communists or these groups that want workers' rights out. But don't forget, there was a horrific communist state, or called themselves communist, but it was a more totalitarian state. And they set up the SS, the Gestapo, and Hitler slowly but surely was able to take power. And the big thing, remember, he adopted Keynesian economics. So here is Germany as they saw themselves being surrounded by enemies. And these are the size of the army, and no, the armies actually weren't quite this big. The French army was not 4.5 million men because they just simply didn't have enough men. But in implying that all these enemies are there. And we're going to begin the steps towards war because Hitler began to press against the Treaty of Versailles. I should add, it shows Germany with a 100,000 man army. In 1934, Hitler did expand the army to 300,000. This was after the Night of the Long Knives. So the army was very much for Hitler getting rid of the SA. Remember the brown shirts, the leadership of that. And yes, that's a 300% increase in the size of the army. But remember, all their opponents, even if you look at the reality of this, France still had an army of 3 million. So Germany with an army of 300,000 didn't seem like that big of a deal. So he did violate the Treaty of Versailles, but it really did not seem like a big deal to his opponents. They also began to build up their air force by taking civilian planes and giving them multi-use, but in reality, Hitler was just kind of pressing against it, talking about it. He really didn't violate the Treaty of Versailles, and don't forget, the rest of the world was in a depression. So, a couple of things happened, though, in the mid-1930s that would really dramatically change things. Okay, the first one was Ethiopia. In 1936, fascist Italy, pressing against the Treaty of Versailles. So my assumption is everyone can hear me now? Good. Mussolini pushing, threatening the Treaty of Versailles. He invaded Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was still independent. It was a relatively weak but independent country. They defeated Italy back in 1894. And so even though this might not seem like on the Mediterranean, this was more like Italy failed. I will bring Italy back from its humiliation. I can't emphasize this enough. These fascist movements are conservative ideals to go back to a time when their country appeared to be stronger. This mythical version of Italian greatness. Germany's going to do the same thing before World War I. So they invaded Ethiopia. And this was a brutal invasion where Ethiopia would use bombing from the air and mustard gas against poorly armed yet brave Ethiopians. And Ethiopia was conquered. It took a long time. Ethiopia is huge. One thing, don't forget, the maps of Africa always understate the size of Africa. And so here is Ethiopian soldiers marching in. Let me get the little pointer here. So, and notice the picture of Mussolini, the cult of the dictator. So Ethiopia was taken. And here is a cartoon of Mussolini using poison gas. And here's an article of Britain, or comic of Britain and France scolding Mussolini. But the League of Nations did nothing. And that's the thing, I should have wrote that down, but make sure you get it. Can you still hear me? Okay, good. So, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and so you have to watch this to pay attention. I'm going to give you some credit for the Gathering Storm. So Zoe asked about that. And what I'll do is, if you watch it and fill out the worksheet, I'll give you some extra credit. Because I'm going to cover a lot of things here. My best laid plans, I was just going to give you kind of credit as notes, didn't work. And so you'll be responsible for that. You show me the worksheet, I'll give you extra credit. And I'm just going to make that for all of you watching. I am sorry about that. I'm a little annoyed. It's just weird. YouTube would not show something on YouTube. All right. So the League of Nations did nothing. And the League of Nations already backed or did very little when Japan invaded Manchuria, which I'll talk about more when we get to before Pearl Harbor. But by not doing anything, this in a way encouraged more aggression. In a way. Remember, the whole thing about the League of Nations in Article 10 was collective security. Collective security as in all the countries together would unify to stop aggression, and that would deter aggression. But if the countries don't come together to stop aggression, that will do nothing to deter aggression. Now, it doesn't mean that Italy was going to invade other places, because as it turned out, Italy, this was about all they could do. But it could encourage countries who are much more bold, aka Germany and Japan. So, Ethiopia would fall, and Britain and France, using mostly colonial troops, would take Ethiopia back 4 years later, give its independence, but poor Ethiopia. While that is going on, Spain would begin a horrific civil war. Now, Spain has been through almost constant disruption for 200 years. It's really ironic. Spain would be this incredible empire in the 1600s, would become a poor, decrepit empire by the 1800s, or the 1700s, and 1800s, they barely were around. The Spanish-American War really destabilized the monarchy and led to the creation of a republic 10 or 14 years later. But in 1936, I didn't put down the year, so make sure you get, it says it right there, October 36, so I guess I do have it there. In 1936, Spain began the Civil War. And the Civil War was, please hope I... For some reason, that doesn't have it there. But Republican Spain, I thought I put a... I'm going to type this in so we make sure we get it. Republican Spain. This is not quite as complete as I had hoped because I plan on watching The Gathering Storm and just popping in a few things. There's a Republican government, and the Republican government was dominated by what they called the Popular Front, a more socialist government. So make sure you get down that this was a government with a unification with socialists and some communists. It was all these different groups, kind of a left-wing party, more liberal party. And the military in Spain, who was fighting a civil war in Spanish Morocco at that moment. They tried to overthrow the government. And you have the Republicans against what they would call the nationalists. And the nationalists would be led by a group of fascists under a man by the name of Franco, right there. And a way to look at it is they were more allied with the fascists. Franco was basically an authoritarian dictator who used the rhetoric of fascism. He was rabidly anti-communist and said this was a communist attempt to defeat Spain. And Franco, in fact, remember how I talked about Der Fuhrer was Nazi Germany, El Supremo was Mussolini in Italy, Franco was El Supremo. So we have El Duce, I messed that up, El Duce in Italy, Der Fuhrer in Germany, El Supremo in Spain. Sorry, I messed that up just a little bit. But Franco, and they would wage a horrific, long civil war against the Spanish. And let me backtrack out of this real quick. Yeah, this is you get to watch a little bit of the creative process here. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, for some reason this is not the one I thought it was, and I'm a little bit... Yeah, that should have worked. Huh, this is just very odd how this doesn't work. Sorry, just relax. I'm going to have to backtrack back and forth between two because this is actually what I wanted to show you, but for some reason this didn't record. The Republican, they were the Popular Front, and they were rabidly anti-communist. I'm sorry, they were communist against the nationalists or the fascists. So these are the fascist government, and a number of people around the world, anti-fascist groups called the International Brigades, they would join up. So, for example, anti-fascists and socialists, or at least just people who hated fascism against in the United States would create the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And here are some of the so-called volunteers from the Soviet Union. Here are members of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So these are Americans who fought on the side of the Republicans against Franco. The problem was they're all over the place. The Soviet Union actually sent troops, but this area in white here was controlled by the Republicans, including the capital, Madrid, and the fighting around Madrid would be horrific. But in reality, their headquarters was Barcelona. And to this day, Barcelona in many ways is separate from the rest of Spain. And every once in a while, including just very recently, they have talked about leaving Spain and forming their own nation. But the Germans and the Italians, sorry about this, for some reason it didn't record the way I wanted. The Germans and the Italians, they sent aid to Franco. And here are German brand new dive bombers, which they just started to make, and I'll get to that in just 1 second. And these are German, they're actually called Ju-52, they're transport planes, but they reconditioned them to carry bombs. And here are Italian soldiers that they sent to fight alongside of Franco. And so they fought along with the Germans. While the Soviets sent a few troops, they are very divided. The Republicans have have the disadvantage of having different groups, from anarchists and socialists and just anti-fascists, and those who are directly on the side of the communists. And this is where at Guernica, a town in northern Spain, which is now called the Basque region of Spain, beautiful area of Spain, the Germans would experiment with something that they had talked about way back in Total War called terror bombing, using mass bombing of a civilian city controlled by the Republicans. And Guernica was destroyed and thousands of civilians were killed or wounded in this terror bombing to try to convince the Republicans, or those supporting the Republicans, it's not worth it. And Pablo Picasso would make one of his most famous paintings called Guernica to try to show, using this new modern abstract art, we called it a cubism, to give the view of the different bodies and the hell of this terror bombing. And some of you might have seen this painting. It's by far one of his most famous works. I like Picasso, but you can also see his different uses of faces and shades and colors. And this would become like a stamp, for example, for Spain, which is kind of weird. But this war would rage for years. And the big thing was Britain and France maintained neutrality. They were scared, especially considering the fact that their country was in depression, but scared to push against the Russians, or scared to push against the Germans and the Italians. And they didn't like Stalin anyways, and so even though the Republicans held Madrid for a very long time, the nationalists step by step were able to win, and by 1939, the nationalists and Franco won. And so let's go back and see if maybe the original one I show, which is more like the one. Yeah, this just isn't working the way I wanted it to. So the font is not exactly what I wanted, but just stick with it. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so the Spanish Civil War would end with a fascist victory. And Italy and Germany would come out appearing stronger, even though the reality, it showed some severe weaknesses in the Italian military and problems with what the Germans thought they were creating a powerful military. Also, I should add one more thing. Britain and France looked very weak. Who could trust them? They claimed to support the Republican military but said nothing. And in the Soviet Union, this also caused problems, which we'll get to a little bit later. So, back to Germany. While this Ethiopia and Spain was going on, remember, Germany was angry about the Treaty of Versailles. And there's a straitjacket of the Treaty of Versailles, and there's Germany trying to rip open the straitjacket of the Treaty of Versailles. So, with that, the Rhineland was supposed to be demilitarized. So Rhineland is this area right here. This area, no German forces at all. It was supposed to be a buffer zone between Germany and France and Belgium. So, even though technically it was part of Germany, they could have no troops there. The area that France occupied that led to hyperinflation was a Ruhrland right here. Well, in 1936, Hitler made up his mind that he was going to militarize this region right here. Militarize means send troops in. Now, this is troops, German troops into Germany, but under the Treaty of Versailles said no troops. This is going to be the biggest test. The German army was still very small. Even in the depths of depression, the French army was powerful, and the British army not as strong, but the powerful fleet and a strong air force. And so Germany planned to invade, and Hitler gave very specific orders. If the French do anything, which under the treaty they're allowed, the treaty says France and Britain, but France is the country that mattered here. France can send troops into the Rhineland to stop German militarization. And Hitler ordered his troops to pull back immediately. So this is just in Ethiopia and Spain. So in March of 1936, Germany militarized the Rhine. And so here you can see German forces marching over bridge Cologne. This is Remagen Bridge, German troops marching in. There are Germans greeting them, German cavalry coming in, and I believe that's in Augsburg, and they're celebrating their return. And France and Britain were furious by this. This is a violation of the treaty, and France wanted to do something immediately. France wanted to send troops over. The problem France had is that they were worried about doing it alone. They didn't know if the German army, how big they were, if they were powerful enough to really stand up to the French army. They didn't want another war. So what they wanted is Britain to join them. But Britain refused. Britain, also in their own political turmoil at that time and depression, Britain said, we're not going to enforce the Treaty of Versailles. Why should we stop German troops from entering Germany? Yes, the Treaty of Versailles said it's demilitarized, but the Rhineland is part of Germany. Why can't they have troops in their own country? And so France basically felt undercut and did nothing. And that's what you got to get down. France did nothing. And by doing nothing, that gave Hitler a massive political victory. This emboldened Hitler. So Hitler sends German troops over, and you notice here the footsteps stomping on the Treaty of Versailles, and you see a Nazi hunting exhibition, and you notice Hitler showing the Treaty of Versailles as this rhino, and other things they might get down the road. This would convince Hitler that the Western Allies are unwilling to stop his violation of the treaty. This was one of the most important moments in history. If France would have, on their own, entered the Rhineland, or Britain would have, it's just so weird, or Britain would have joined France, and they would have sent troops in. Hitler would have had to run back across the river with his tail between his legs, and this would have been a massive political blow to Hitler. Part of Hitler's appeal was that he was going to stand up to the Treaty of Versailles and make Germany that great country it once was before World War I, and they were stabbed in the back. And this would have dramatically undercut him. This is one of these moments that the entire course of history could have changed. The entire course. And instead, Hitler didn't. Or Hitler was emboldened. Britain and France did not stop him. And so, immediately after this, and this one you have to get down because I don't think I typed that in, but Hitler began to rebuild the army. And please write that down. Hitler began to rebuild the German army. They reinstated conscription. They openly flaunted the fact that they were secretly working on tanks and planes. Germany ignored the treaty. In fact, they started working on new battleships, relatively small ships. Well, they're complex, like the the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst. They started making battleships, openly violating the Treaty of Versailles, and submarines. After this, they openly just said, we're going to start building an army, because they figured Britain and France would not stop them. And they would join with Italy, called the Rome-Berlin Axis. And this was called the Anti-Comintern, or the Anti-Communist Pact. The Anti-Communist Pact. And in 1939, it would become the Pact of Steel, a military alliance. Even though, to be honest with you, Mussolini was never really into Hitler's warlike plans. He wanted to bluster and brag. Ethiopia was about as far as he would go. He would consider invading Albania. Spain turned out to be much more expensive than Italy was prepared for. But this would begin the beginnings of the Axis. And they began to openly flaunt the Treaty of Versailles and rebuild the military. And then in 1938, once again, flagrantly violating the Treaty of Versailles, on March 12, 1938, in what's called Anschluss, Germany unified with Austria. Austria was a Germanic-speaking country. As you can see in this map, it's not very big, but Austria was a relatively small country. And Germany would unify. Austria was in the process of electing somebody who was anti-Nazi. The National Socialist Party was growing in Austria. And so Hitler jumped the gun and sent troops over the border to say, we are unifying with the real government of Austria, the Nazi government. And there was not really a fight. Here are German troops entering Vienna, and so here's Germany and Austria unifying, flagrantly violating the Treaty of Versailles, and Britain and France did nothing. And that's the biggie. Britain and France did nothing. And here are smiling German or Austrians welcoming German troops, all with their swastikas, their flags, which were produced before they came so they could have this glorious entry. And here are German troops harassing an Austrian Jew. It happened really fast. And once again, the Allies did nothing. And Germany and Hitler proclaimed that the German military machine is stronger than ever before. We are more capable than ever before. But this hid real weaknesses as Germany began to expand their army relatively slowly. The vast majority of their soldiers, at least their equipment, were still being carried by wagon, pulled by horse. The majority of their trucks and new mechanized equipment that Germany claimed they were expanding, 60% broke down without even a fight entering Austria. This hid the reality of the German army, that they were not near ready for war. Yet Hitler, emboldened by this, assumed not only that they were ready for war, but nobody would stop them. And then here is the Anschluss. You can see them as Germany and Austria rebuilding, and they will be the keystone of German greatness. And here is a German soldier entering Austria. The ironic thing is that one of the first things that SS men did for Himmler, and this was all done because they knew Hitler would want this, they went to the draft board in Salzburg, where the last place Hitler lived, and they went to the old records of the old Austrian Empire and destroyed records of Adolf Hitler, who was drafted into the Austrian army but fled to Munich. This is in 1910, before World War I, to avoid the draft. They didn't want it known that Hitler, who made part of his reputation on being the war hero, actually avoided the draft, was a draft dodger. And they had a plebiscite, which is a vote to say whether or not they will join the German Empire under Adolf Hitler. And you notice the vote is yes for Hitler, 9 no. And of course, they overwhelmingly voted to join Germany. Austria too felt humiliated after losing their empire, and now they feel like they're part of a greater nation. That is why after World War II, Austria too will be divided up into 4 occupation zones of the Allies, and so will Vienna. But in the mid-1950s, they would decide it would be a neutral country, not like Germany. Next, the Sudetenland. Hitler kept pressing against Treaty of Versailles. Remilitarize the Rhineland, build up the army, Austria, and now the western region of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was a country, a republic, a democratic republic created after the Treaty of Versailles, and it was basically made up of this section here, which was, now it's Czechia, but it's Bohemians, and then Slovaks. And these are more, this is one ethnic group, this is another ethnic group. Oh, the Ruthenians, they're Ukrainians. And there's also Poles who live here, a various group here. But along this border right here, about 60% of the population of this region called the Sudetenland were ethnically German-speaking people. Now, they've been part of the Austrian Empire. They have never been part of Germany. But Hitler claimed the Sudeten Germans were being mistreated by the Czechoslovakian government. They were being brutalized, their rights were taken away, and how dare German-speaking people be ruled by people who were not ethnically German. And he claimed that he must come in and protect the Sudeten Germans. And if the Czechs resist, they'll go to war. And the thing was, both Britain and France both guaranteed Czechoslovakian independence. They had treaties with Britain and France. The Czechs did. So Germany is now threatening. This is different than Austria now. This is now a country that is not German and was an independent country created after Versailles. Two different times Hitler would be dissuaded from actual invasion in Munich, Germany. The first time, Britain and France sent representatives and Hitler said he would wait. The second time is the one we got to get to. And this is the one we call the Munich Agreement. I don't have time to go into all the details, but Hitler would meet in the Nazi Party headquarters in Munich. This big, ugly cement building that kind of fit Nazi architecture. It was so big and so heavy duty that it survived the bombings in World War II in 1945. And so it's still there, the Nazi headquarters. So this room where you see Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, Mussolini was invited even though technically he had no real stake in this. Neville Chamberlain, right here, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, it'd be the first time he ever rode on the plane. This is 1938. He ever rode on a plane. He would go to Munich, the Prime Minister, and there is the Premier de Ladière of France. They met, that room right there, which was this office created for Hitler, even though now he's in Berlin, is now the headmaster's office of an art school. This building is now art school. You can go in and look up these grand stairways. It looks very odd because this art school has these ornate marble facade around the interior of it. It's rather beautiful. And you can go up there at certain times. When I was there, I've been there twice. And the first time we could go into the main hall, but they were having a meeting there. The headmaster, aka principal, was in there. And the second time it was on a Sunday and so it was closed. And so this building they met. And here, de Ladière was convinced we've probably got to go to war. Chamberlain was desperate to avoid the war. He did not want to go to war. And Hitler, who actually wanted to go to war, he did not realize his military was not ready. He just wanted war. He was ready. He made all sorts of conditions and got everything he wanted from Chamberlain. And Mussolini, he was in the middle. He could speak English and French and German. He, not great, but he could speak it. And he acted like a translator, going around, bragging, waving his arms. He was like the real big shot. Mussolini loved it. And so, here they met. And Britain was trying everything. And Britain kind of pushed France to give in to Hitler's demand. We'll give you the Sudetenland. We'll give you it. We'll give you the Sudetenland. And as long as Hitler agrees, that's all he wants. And Hitler's like, yeah, I'll agree. And here's a great picture of Hitler and Mussolini waiting for Chamberlain and de Ladière as they're like bellhops, and they'll come in when Mussolini and Hitler are ready. Basically saying that Hitler dominated this conference, even though he actually did not want war. And here is Hitler marching over these spineless leaders of democracy. There's Britain and France and all these things that he did. And here is where, at Munich, Hitler got the Sudetenland. They agreed it, and they agreed to give Hitler the Sudetenland, and Hitler promised, I won't take anything else. But remember what I told you about fascist totalitarian leaders. They lie all the time. In fact, Chamberlain would put a piece of paper down and say, hey, just sign this. Sign this piece of paper. And say, you never want another country again. And Hitler was like, yeah, sure, I'll sign it. And signed it. And that said that Hitler is done. He will be satisfied with it. But of course Hitler wasn't satisfied. Hitler saw this as, I can take anything I want. And this will be known in history as appeasement. Appeasement is, and please get this down, giving into aggression. Appeasement. Basically what it was is that Chamberlain, so desperate for peace, gave Hitler whatever he wanted, hoping that the bully would not ask for more. But not understanding that the bully is only just getting started. And Hitler lied completely. The ironic thing about appeasement was, everybody's from then on is going to equate appeasement with Munich. I can't emphasize that enough. Appeasement is Munich. And so they're going to say during the Cold War, when those who wanted the United States to act tougher and push and be more confrontational with the Soviet Union, they'll say, if we don't act tough with the Soviet Union, it'll be like Munich all over again. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, it was said that if we don't stand up to Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction, that didn't exist, but weapons of mass destruction, it's Munich all over again. People use this over and over again. It's like Munich, it's like Munich. They'll say the same things about the agreement that President Obama made with Iran, that President Trump bailed out to get Iran to stop the nuclear program. It's Munich all over again. So Munich will equal appeasement. And so with that, when Daladier got back to France with the agreement that they gave the Sudetenland and just gave in to French or to German aggression, Daladier thought he would be met with a mob ready to lynch him. In fact, he was met by cheering crowds. But nobody was met with more greater acclaim than Neville Chamberlain. Throughout history today, people look back at Neville Chamberlain as totally giving in to aggression. But here he is, waving that piece of paper signed by Herr Hitler, promising peace in our time, waving that piece of paper, and people cheered. Today, this is looked at as a classic example of giving into aggression, and this encouraged Hitler to attack. Now, I must add, no. Hitler was going to do it anyways. The biggest example of appeasement is the Rhineland. And make sure you write that down. The Rhineland is where Britain and France might have stopped Hitler. By 1938, it was a done deal. Hitler would have gone to war. Who knows? The war would have been different, no doubt. But Chamberlain, by this time, it was probably too late. And so even if he would have stood up to Hitler, I don't think it would have mattered. And here are all these pro-Chamberlain cartoons. So today people look back at Chamberlain as being weak and ineffectual. Not at the time. Here he is standing down Mars, the god of war. The god of war. God of war? Here he is, the man the world looks to, Neville Chamberlain. Here he is like a dove, bringing peace back. There's still hope for peace. And you notice they have him flying because there was a big deal when he flew on the plane. Chamberlain stood down Hitler, they thought. But of course, we know now historically that's not true. But here is cartoon of example of how Munich, this agreement will be used to justify the Vietnam War, Iraq, Iran, this over and over again. So from now on, I'm going to say Munich will equal appeasement. So make sure you put big stars and big letters. Munich equals appeasement. Even though the time to stop Hitler would have been the Rhineland. Sorry. So here are Sudeten Germans giving the Roman salute, which is now what I was thinking of that, the Hitler salute. And here's a German propaganda poster. The Sudetenland is free. The thing is that the Sudeten Germans had never been part of Germany, but they were ethnically German. But I should add, this rendered the Czechs completely impotent. They had counted on British and French support, and now they didn't have it. They had built an elaborate defensive line in the mountains around Germany, but it was in the Sudetenland. And now their best defenses are gone. They are alone. You should add, or by be thinking, wait a minute, what about the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union hates fascist Germany. Well, they're going through their own problems right now. But look back at Munich. Do you notice something here? Who's invited? Hitler of Germany, Mussolini of Italy, Chamberlain of Britain, Daladier of France. Who's not even there? The Czechs. Czechoslovakia is not even there. They're not even invited, and their country was dismembered and destroyed, and they had no plan in it. You can imagine how small countries in Europe are thinking no one cares a lick about us. But you notice who else is not there? Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was furious. And so, with that, the Sudetenland is free. At the end of 38, this is all messed up. So we're going to go back to here really quick. And so with that, the Sudetenland is free. And I should add, with that, sorry, the Sudetenland is free. So let's get back to this map. Do you see that right here? Just 6 months after Munich. Just 6 months. And get this down, I didn't make a slide. Just 6 months later, Germany took all of Sudetenland. Or I'm sorry, all of the Czechoslovakia. They took it all. Just 6 months later. So I'm a little bit discombobulated. I was going to show the movie and just show a couple slides, and that is why I did not have a slide, because the video had that. But just 6 months later, all of Czechoslovakia fell. They knew they were alone. Their government was in disarray because of what happened with the Sudetenland. Their defenses were gone. They had a pretty powerful army with a strong arms manufacturing sector, which would greatly help Germany during World War II. But Germany took it, and let's go back to here. They took all of this and would make this part of Greater Germany and create an independent Slovakia, which would have issues after the war and have issues after the fall of the Cold War. So with that is going to lead to the last thing I want to get to today. Second to last thing, Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht on the night of November 9th and 10th. I don't know why there's a hyphen between 1 and 0. But the night of November 9th and 10th of 1938. And Kristallnacht means the night of the broken glass. And this action, what happened was this. Well, this was what we call an organized attack. Even though technically it was by civilians, it was organized by the German government against the last remaining Jewish populations in Germany. A Jewish immigrant to France who fled Germany, assassinated someone at the German embassy in Paris. So a German was assassinated in Paris, and they used this as an excuse to say that the Jews are ready to rise up. This is the time they're going to take back Germany, and so we must attack it. And in this outpouring of anger against Jews for this dastardly assassination, Jewish-owned buildings, stores would be attacked, and all the windows and the last remaining shop windows of Jewish stores would be broken, thus night of broken glass. Homes would be attacked. Here's a synagogue in Munich that would be burned to the ground. This was an organized attack on Jews, the night of the broken glass, Kristallnacht. And remember what I told you, there were already concentration camps, but these were political prisoners. Some rights were taken away with the Nuremberg laws in 1934. But this Kristallnacht was the last effort, the last attempt, and please get this down, to force the remaining Jewish population, about half had fled already, to leave. Leave now. Get out of Germany. This is their effort to force the remaining Jews out of Germany before World War II started. And here's Hitler looking at destroyed shops in 1938, and basically what it was is Hitler was saying, we can't stop our people from attacking Jewish-owned places, because the Jews are so dastardly that the Germans have no choice but to attack. Leave. And a lot did leave. Unfortunately, most of them went to Poland. And I think you can guess what's going to happen there. Some went to the Netherlands, France, or Belgium. Britain took almost none, and the United States actually turned back many Jews, most of which would be killed in the final solution after 1942. Remember, this is the most racist time in history. The United States has passed the National Origins Act of 1924. And so with that, we're coming to the invasion of Poland, and that is where I'll quit. I'm sorry I'm all discombobulated. I would have got further before, but the movie thing kind of threw me for a loop. It was very odd how I was broadcasting on YouTube, taking something from YouTube, and it wouldn't let me broadcast it. Are there any questions? And so that's why this was not as organized as I would have liked. But remember what I told you. If you turn in the gathering strum, I'll give you some extra credit. I will collect this as notes, and I'll get this organized. Remember, there's a quiz on Friday. And remember the packet. I'm going to start going over more along with DBQs, kind of mixing things in, especially after we get done with World War II. I am going to start the 1950s and the Cold War. And we'll finish most of that after the exam, because then we'll just go back to being a regular class. All right. If there are no questions, I'm sorry about this being messed up, but hey, you go with the flow. All right.